Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Arlene Dihamko, the Multidimensional MD. My mission is to help bring the intuitive aspects of health back to medicine in practical and tangible ways so that you can access deeper healing and experience more peace, love, and joy in your everyday lives. Today, I wanted to talk about vitamin K2. And this came up because I had recommended it to a family member some months ago. And then he came back and told me that he had experienced like such great benefits from it. His bone density had increased, which was really remarkable given his age. So I wanted to go through vitamin K2 in more detail for you. And this is something that there is so much literature for, so much evidence in the medical journals and articles, but not all physicians are familiar with it. Not everyone is recommending it for the things that there is so much evidence for. So I wanted to highlight that for you today. And we're going to go through the difference between vitamin K1 and K2, the benefits of K2, further possible benefits of K2 that are still pending, and food sources and dosing. So we'll go through all of that. So first, let's start with what is the difference between vitamin 1 and vitamin K2? So the thing is, vitamin K is actually the name of a group of vitamins. It's just like vitamin A. Vitamin A is also the name for a group of vitamins. And so vitamin K was originally named for the German word coagulation, which is spelled with a K, but actually refers mostly to K1 that has to do with regulation of coagulation or blood clotting, and not necessarily the other vitamin K subtypes. So vitamin K is also a fat soluble vitamin, which is great because it means that you can build up stores of vitamin K in your body. And vitamin K1 is known as phyloquinone. They're both quinones. All vitamin Ks are quinones. And vitamin K2 is known as menaquinone. So they have slightly different structures. Vitamin K1 has I'm going to tell you this for the students and people out there that know some biochemistry, and I know my kids do. So vitamin K1 has a monounsaturated tail with 4 carbon groups, and vitamin K2 has a polyunsaturated tail in different lengths, are named accordingly: MK4 with 4 carbon tails, 4 carbons in the tail, MK7, and on up. So vitamin K1 has an affinity for the liver, where it helps to regulate the production of anticoagulation factor. So it helps with bleeding and clotting. Now, we're focusing on vitamin K2 here. Vitamin K2 has an affinity, meaning that it goes towards other tissues, extrahepatic tissue. So other organs and tissues in the body besides the liver, which is hepatic tissue. And the longer chain MK7 transports more easily to those extrahepatic tissues. That MK7 is also more easily absorbed into the body and has a longer half-life. So K2 actually activates what is called the MGP, or this anti-calcific protein in the extrahepatic tissues. So this includes the heart, the lungs, kidneys, retina, and other microvascular tissues. So isn't that interesting because it's an anti-calcific protein. So vitamin K2 helps to bring calcium to where it's needed. So more in the bones than into your vessels, where it will harden the vessels, and that's where we get some cardiovascular disease. So that brings us into K2 and cardiovascular disease. So it can increase energy by increasing the mitochondrial ATP production. And this has to do with exercise endurance and cardiac output, since the heart is a muscle. So keep that in mind if you're fatigued or you don't feel like you have enough endurance when you exercise. So it helps the cardiac output by increasing the mitochondria ATP, making energy in the heart muscle, can also increase the stroke volume, so how much blood is being pumped by the heart and the heart rate, and decreases lactate, so those metabolites in the heart tissue. And overall, it is known to decrease cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. So, your likelihood of getting sick or dying from cardiovascular disease. So, this decreases with upper levels of vitamin K2 in in your body. So they did studies measuring something that measured how much vitamin K2 you had in your body, and those that were in the upper quadrant had better cardiovascular health and were less likely to get sick and die from cardiovascular related diseases. It can also decrease your risk for vascular and valvular calcification. So this is really interesting to note, because when you have valvular calcification, hardened valves in the heart, and hardened arteries, then often people are placed on warfarin or these anticoagulants to help thin the blood. So warfarin is a kind of vitamin K antagonist. So remember, we talked a little bit about vitamin K1. So that helps with coagulation. So warfarin is a vitamin K antagonist. So um, like basically thins your blood. And in the literature, they know that warfarin actually is associated with a 6% increase in aortic valve calcification per year. So, my brother had actually brought this up to me because he had been reading about it, and it was really fascinating because people are placed on warfarin for valvular disease and cardiovascular disease, and here it's also contributing to cardiovascular and valvular disease. So it's like, what can you do? Now there are newer agents for anticoagulation that are not vitamin K dependent. So this would allow for safer use of vitamin K, to prevent like atherosclerosis and osteoporosis, and because warfarin competes with vitamin K, then it can actually contribute to osteoporosis as well. So then it's difficult because there are some mixed studies, but we need to consider this. And I don't hear many physicians talking about this, even specialists, and patients that are put on warfarin. And so we do have to be careful with dosing if you are on warfarin or another vitamin K antagonist, because there are studies showing that vitamin K and both vitamin Ks, and especially vitamin K2, can affect the INR, which is the measurement of the effect of the warfarin on the body and the blood thinning. So you just have to be careful. And I would suggest, if you need vitamin K supplementation, then to talk to your physician, talk to your cardiologist, and hopefully more of them will start to be more aware of this. The thing is that if you're on warfarin, you need vitamin K, because the vitamin K1 is, your body is selectively converting the K2 back to K1, or not converting the K1 to K2. So your K2 levels will drop because the warfarin is competing with K1. And there is a balance, though, because you can have some supplementation of K1, especially K2, and it will lower your need for warfarin. So this needs to be worked out with your physician. If you are on warfarin or any other vitamin K antagonist, then please talk to your physician before starting on K2. From this one article, it did say supplementation of greater than 50 micrograms of vitamin K2 requires INR monitoring. So just know that if you are on medications. Okay, so going on. Vitamin K2 and metabolism, insulin, and weight loss. This also gets so many people's attention. So Vitamin K2 is known to reduce the risk for type 2 diabetes. It helps the B cells in the pancreas increase production of insulin. It also increase insulin sensitivity so that you respond better to insulin. And if you note signs of insulin resistance, those would be carb cravings, blood sugar increase, more insulin release, and feelings of this hunger and fatigue. And increase fat storage, so especially around the mid area of the abdomen. So if you are getting these swings of ups and downs when you're eating and you're craving sweets or carbs, then take note, maybe you need more vitamin K2. There are studies showing that if you have sufficient levels or if you take vitamin K2, then it has favorable effects on obesity, this is in quotes, with reduction in abdominal and visceral fat. So, that kind of like apple shape. So, if you are having trouble losing weight and you are tend to gain weight in your belly area, then you probably could really benefit on being on some vitamin K2. And we will talk about dosing and food sources in a little bit. So next, vitamin K2 and osteoporosis, bone density, and hormones. So um, your bones produce actually a hormone called osteocalcin. This is a protein hormone produced by the osteoblasts cells. These osteoblasts are bone cells. And K2 can help to trigger osteocalcin. And osteocalcin is this protein hormone found in the bone, and it can also uh, function as inhibits bone formation, but also function as a hormone and regulates glucose metabolism in the pancreas, as well as testosterone production and muscle mass. So, just an aside there that vitamin K2 and your bone health have to deal with hormone health as well. It's all interrelated. And how many people knew that the bones also produce a hormone? So interesting. So this helps you balance testosterone and insulin and possibly other hormones since they're all interrelated. So we know that there is such strong evidence in the literature for vitamin K2 to be used in the treatment of osteoporosis along with vitamin D and calcium. And when you use it with vitamin D and calcium, the benefits of vitamin K2 rival bisphosphonate therapy without the toxicity. So that is huge. And I don't know how many endocrinologists are recommending this. And this is in the literature. There's research for this, and there's level 1 and level 2 evidence for this. So that is so amazing. Vitamin K2 improves bone quality, reducing the risk of fractures. It's not sure whether bone density may always be increased in studies. It's like mixed results. However, my family member also mentioned that after just months of using vitamin K2 in sufficient doses, he saw improvement in a scan in his bone density. So that's really remarkable. That means a lot to me too, personally, because when I was in medical school, I remember that there was a rep for, it must have been a DEXA scan or some sort of bone scan. And they were in the office and they'll say, "Hey, do you want to have your bone density measured? We're here." And I was like, "Sure." I'm 20 something years old. I'm like, why would I need my bone density checked? But it's free and the reps are there, right? You're a starving student. So they are like, "Oh, that's weird. Your results show that you're osteopenic, meaning your bone density is low," which was really strange because um, I ran a lot, I exercised, I used to teach aerobic classes. So there was no reason for my bone density to be low. I was so young. And you know what I thought was, well, I guess that machine is not a really good machine because there's no way my bone density is low. I didn't even consider it as a truth for me, which is kind of funny. Um, but looking back on my health then and what I was eating, definitely had those cravings, ate a lot more gluten, um, and so I did have like some sensitivities and things that have resolved since then. But there were reasons looking back in my knowledge now with holistic and integrative medicine why my bone density would have been low. So just because you're young and just because you exercise doesn't mean that your bone density is going to be completely normal, healthy range. So just to consider that this is not just for older people, this is for everybody. And they found that 30% of children were deficient in vitamin K2 and they're growing. And so this is really important. And also, most people over age 40 were deficient in K2, and we'll talk about why because of the food sources. Anyway, let me go on about the bone. So they found that if you're deficient in K2, you're more at risk for developing osteoarthritis of the knee, and also that I'm going to talk about this more a little bit later, but that it could also affect rheumatoid arthritis. That one didn't have quite as much evidence, but anyway, for osteoporosis, there is a lot of strong evidence. So definitely. Okay, so vitamin K2 and dental health. So this was a 2023 review, and they found that vitamin K supplementation with fiber help to prevent tooth loss from periodontal disease. And so if you have cavities, if you have any periodontal disease, if you have any dental issues, then strongly consider vitamin K2 supplementation, because remember, vitamin K2 helps to bring calcium to where it is needed in the bones and helps to bring it away from places you don't want it, like in the arteries, in the joints, in the lungs, in the retina. So there are many more benefits that they are looking into. There are studies showing possibilities of K2 helping in cancer by preventing growth and metastasis of several cancer lines, including advanced prostate cancer. So definitely look into that. If you have cancer or you know anyone with it, talk to your physician about it. It could help the liver and chronic liver disease by stimulating regenerative growth, by stimulating stem cells. I mean, this is huge information. It could improve kidney function by increasing the filtration rate and preventing further renal artery calcification. So, helping that blood flow to the kidneys to nourish the kidneys so that they can do their job effectively. It can help to balance the immune system. So, they studied kids who had atopic dermatitis, eczema, and it could decrease the overactivation of T cells, a kind of immune cell. This needs further studies, but I'm going to start thinking about that for kids with allergies and eczema. And then what I was talking about for arthritis, it can decrease the risk for development of osteoarthritis, and then also reduces inflammation in rheumatoid arthritis. And they have evidence for that because it reduces inflammatory marker levels like CRP. So, the summary of all of this in terms of the review article is vitamin. I'm going to read it, quote the article, and I'll put article links in the comments below if you would like me to. So vitamin K2 may be a useful adjunct for the treatment of osteoporosis along with vitamin D and calcium, rivaling bisphosphonate therapy without toxicity. It may also significantly reduce morbidity and mortality in cardiovascular health by reducing vascular calcification. Vitamin K2 appears promising in the areas of diabetes, cancer, and osteoarthritis. Vitamin K use in warfarin therapy is safe and may improve iron control, although a dosage adjustment is required. This is a quote directly from a journal article, and I will put the source directly below. So now we get to food sources, and then I'm going to go into dosing. So in terms of food sources of vitamin K1 and K2, I'm going to mention both just because it's nice to keep in mind both K1 and K2. The thing is, your gut flora also produces K2, but there's mixed thoughts on how much of this is bioavailable to the body. There's thoughts that some of it must be available for absorption, but some of it is also membrane bound to the gut bacteria. But I feel that if you're producing sufficient levels, this has to do with your gut flora, healthy gut, then this has so much to do with supporting your gut health, that healthy gut flora. So anyway, your gut flora is supposed to produce vitamin K2. Um, so let's do food sources of K1 first. Again, this K1 helps with coagulation. It's best absorbed through food rather than supplementation, although there's a lot of variation in bioavailability that is not completely understood. For vitamin K1, you're going to look at green leafy vegetables, including your cruciferous veggies, collards, turnip greens, kale, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cabbage, as well as lettuces and spinach. Not as much available in fruits, although blueberries, blackberries, kiwi, grapes have it, as well as avocado and carrot, especially carrot juice to have higher concentration. You can also get it in dried figs and dried prunes. Again, we're talking about vitamin K1 here, not vitamin K2. And some nuts, including pine nuts, cashews, and pistachios. Eating those veggies, those dark greens and cruciferous veggies with some butter or oil, like olive oil, will increase assimilation of vitamin K1. And this is so interesting to me because that is a strong Edgar Casey recommendation to always eat your veggies with either some sort of oil, like olive oil, or some gelatin, so sprinkling gelatin on veggies. Now, in terms of food sources of K2, MK7, if we're talking about supplementation, again, is particularly well absorbed and has a long half-life compared to K1. K1 and K2 can convert to each other, but K2 is better absorbed. So you tend to need more K1 to be equivalent to, supplementing with K2. So we find K2 in fermented foods because, again, it's anything that the bacteria has to do with the production of the food. Just like the bacteria in your gut can produce K2, so can fermented foods like natto, which is fermented soy. It's popular in Japan. Sauerkraut also has K2, again, because it is a fermented food. Natto is the highest food source of K2, but it's not popular in our culture here. So some people will supplement with it. Other fermented foods include cheeses, especially grass-fed cheeses, Gouda cheese, blue cheese, Munster, brie, and hard cheeses. Now, just remember with the alkaline diet, we aren't supposed to have a lot of that, but if you have a little bit and you are not sensitive to dairy, then you can actually get some benefit from the cheeses. So I like to not necessarily label, especially whole foods, as good or bad foods. So it's not like fats are bad. It's not like all cheeses are bad. It's more the ratios and what quality of the foods that you're getting. So you could also find K2 in butter, egg yolks, lard. So animal products, the animals eat the grass, which has K1 in it, and then the animals convert it into K2. So this is why animal products have K2. You'll find it in liver and other organ meats, in salami and sausage. And again, if you don't eat a lot of animal products, then consider the other fermented foods like natto, sauerkraut, or other fermented foods. So there are conditions that can interfere with vitamin K absorption, and that includes malabsorption issues like Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, those are inflammatory bowel diseases, celiac, or any gluten sensitivity or food sensitivity that is creating a lot of inflammation in the gut, cystic fibrosis, bariatric surgery. So if you have any gut inflammation, trouble in your gut, even if you're eating really well, you may not be digesting your food and assimilating your food as well as you could. So sometimes I see people and they're like, but I have such a healthy diet. So they can look further and it's like, okay, what can we do to help that gut flora? And that's like a whole other topic, but something to consider. So now thinking about dosing for vitamin K2. So remember, I mentioned earlier that 30% of people are deficient in K2, and most children, people over age 40, are deficient. So um, recommendation for K2 would be to take longer chains of K2, especially that MK7, which is the most studied. And you need about 180 to 360 micrograms per day. For young children, this could be about 50 micrograms. But there is a high safety level for dosing for vitamin K. And unless you are taking warfarin or on another vitamin K antagonist, then you should be okay with this kind of dosing. If you are taking warfarin or another vitamin K antagonist, then definitely talk to your physician to help you with that dosing. Vitamin K1, again, can be converted to K2, but requires higher dosing. So we're looking at 1 to 2 grams per day versus micrograms, that 180 to 360 micrograms of K2 per day. And both K1 and K2 supplementation can help reduce arterial stiffness and endothelial dysfunction. So that's why I wanted to go over food sources of both vitamin K1 and K2, because it's nice to keep that in mind for a rounded diet. And that is a lot of information. And so I hope that helps you in some way. If you would like, then you can always go back. We'll put some tabs in this episode and the details below. So click on that. So if you need to review anything, you can click on the tab that you need to, and it will take you to the place in the video so you can go over the information again. So thank you so much for joining me today. If you would like to connect with me further, you can on Instagram at All Worlds Health, on Facebook at All Worlds Health and Pediatrics, and via my website, allworldshealth.com. I send out my weekly newsletter on Wednesdays. You can sign up for that at allworldshealth.com. So have a beautiful rest of your week. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm sorry I missed you last week. It just got a little crazy in my home life. So usually I'm here on Wednesdays, somewhere between 11 and 12 noon Eastern time. So lots of love to all of you. I'll see you next time.